And it's our absolute pleasure to be joined by Jonathan Gullis, the MP for Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Talk, former school teacher, huge fan and advocate and supporter of the Conservative Friends of Education, also a member of the House of Commons Education Select Committee, who will be returning to the classroom after Christmas in order to help out with the crisis of teacher shortages and in order to keep schools open. Jonathan, it's good to see you and hope you've had a good Christmas.
Hey, Doc, how are you doing? And yeah, I've had a lovely Christmas, thank you very much. Amelia's second Christmas, but obviously now she actually knows what's going on. So I had lots of fun watching wrapping paper getting ripped all over the place. I've got so many toys. I need more chests of drawers to be able to hide everything away. So the living room looks semi-tidy. But yeah, it's been really, really nice.
And she's had some Port Vale gear and memorabilia, hasn't she, I think, I see?
Father Christmas did deliver Port Vale gear up the Vale as always. She is born in Stoke, Amelia. She's supporting her local team. I think there is another team in Stoke-on-Trent in the south of the city that's sort of semi-known, but that's Stoke's second team. We support Stoke's first team, Port Vale, and obviously the Wembley of the North, which is Vale Park, which is always a pleasure to visit.
Well, we're going to talk about teaching, not about football rivalries and tribalism in the game. But Jonathan, you were a teacher prior to being an MP. Can you give us just a brief overview of your experience as a teacher?
Yeah, no. So I I fell in love with teaching when I was at university. I was volunteering at Mabel Pritchard School in Oxford, which is an SEND school. In my second and third year, worked with some amazing young people, fell in love with the profession, and then I ended up signing up to do my PGCE secondary and citizenship at the IOE, Institute of Education, University College London. Did that for a year, and then got my first job at Blackfen School for Girls in the London Borough of Bexley, which has just had a recent by-election, as you know. And actually, Louis French studied there for sixth form, although he is slightly older than me, despite his more youthful look. So I didn't actually teach him. So started there in 2012, and I taught all the way through till December 13th, 2019, the day after the general election. I went actually into the classroom the day after the polling day. So I got my result at 5:30 in the morning on the 13th of December, drove into the school car park, took a power nap for an hour in the car, and then was in there for my final day before obviously my resignation was accepted. And then off I went to Westminster on a Saturday to get ready to be an MP. So I am absolutely petrified in some ways, because I think after being 2 years out of the classroom, I've probably forgotten lots of the old hints and tricks, be a bit rusty. But I'm also excited because I think it doesn't harm anyone to spend time with the profession. I've always said this: MPs should go in and spend, a couple of days, at least a year, being in a classroom with a teaching assistant, being in a classroom with the teacher, not just the head teacher or deputy head when they go on these visits, because that way you get to really do what you did in your PGCE, as you know, Dan. Yeah. Follow a student round so they get the student's eye view of what it's like to go from one lesson to the next, different subjects, different teaching styles, different approaches. That's a really, really important thing to do. I know that I've not had a chance yet, but I'm looking forward to doing a big shift with the nurses, for example, at the Royal Stoke in A&E. I'm looking forward to doing a proper shift with Staffordshire Police, 2 12-hour shifts with both of them to really get to understand. I want to do some stuff with the armed forces as well. So at least that when I talk about it, I can have some small insight, and I think that's important with teaching as well. But I'm also looking forward to it because I want to see how good my subject knowledge still is. And my partner, as you know, is an RE teacher, and I taught RE, but I wasn't a specialist in it. So I'm going to have to be taking some lessons from her over the next week to make sure I'm all clued up.
And why have you answered this call to arms? Why are you returning to the classroom?
Well, look, I actually volunteered after when we had the first lockdown, before we closed schools to the majority of students and they were told to work from home. I actually did a video on my Facebook page where I volunteered to local schools and emailed local schools saying, look, if you need someone to come in and help, I will come in and help. I just saw it as a small duty that I could do, really. We see teachers, police officers, firefighters, the army, they've all done their bit, and teachers are fantastic public servants. And I think that, sadly, because of some militant teaching unions like the Not Education Union, who are obsessed with making out as if teachers don't want to be in the classroom, which couldn't be further from the truth. What I wanted to do, I know, Dan, you know me, I couldn't resist a dig at Balston and Courtney, who should resign with immediate effect for being a disgrace to the profession. But what should happen is that I wanted to do my bit and play my part. And I know on the Education Select Committee, Rob Halfon, the chair of the committee, myself, kept calling for a volunteer army. We've also got the new Secretary of State, Nadeem Zahawi, someone I know well, having lived in his constituency and him mentoring me. So he's to blame for me. And I was absolutely delighted that he did this call, because ultimately Omicron, whilst we know the science is showing us that it's milder in terms of the symptoms, it is very transmissible, and it's meaning that teachers are missing, and some teachers are going to get pinged over this period, and they will miss necessarily the first week or 2 weeks of term in particular as we come back from Christmas. And I want to make sure that we don't have to send year groups or whole schools home to work out of a textbook, to work offline, because nothing can ever beat face-to-face teaching. And even if I can just play a very small part in helping to keep schools open to all its students, then I'll feel like I've done something.
How do you feel ex-teachers, retired teachers will respond? Do you think there'll be a big uptake? Is there any indications that people are signing up?
I think something like there was tens of thousands of visits to the Get Into Teaching web link that the Department of Education is promoting, where you can find your region, then find your local teaching supply agencies. I've contacted two. I've sent my CV in, which was I had to quickly type one up. So type one up and sent it in. I did some online forms. So I'm just waiting to, go through the final sort of checks, obviously DBS and all that stuff. And then I'll be on the books and ready to be deployed, which I'm looking forward to. And I think, and I hope that lots of them come forward. It's so important. We all have a role to play. No one's asking you to quit your job and give up, do this full time. But if you do have a spare few hours, if you're retired and you want to come forward and help out, then, do your bits. And like I say, I'm going to be doing mine. I know that I'm going to be balancing the MP with the teaching side of things. And I'm sure one of the questions, Daniel, is, because I know I've seen that some people have asked me, how am I going to mix the two? Well, I'm offering my Fridays. Those are days when I'd be in the constituency anyway. And I will, if I can, do the occasional Thursday. If parliamentary business allows, then I will, of course, come back on Thursdays. Monday to Wednesday will still very much be me in Westminster in the House of Commons. I will, of course, do my lateral flows to make sure that I'm not going, every day, to make sure that I'm protected as well as protecting other people. But yeah, no, that's how I'll be balancing it. So again, I'm not a hero. I'm just doing a very, very small thing to help out local schools in Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Talk as best as I can do.
And Jonathan, in the Commons over the past 2 and a bit years, we've seen you have some barbed exchanges with Ian Blackford, members of the Labour Party and others, and of course, your good friends, Bowstead and Courtney. But do you think you've got any skills that you've learned in the House of Commons over the past years that will equip you well for the trials and tribulations of 11 to 16-year-olds in the classroom? What can you bring to the classroom?
I thought when I taught in secondary schools for those 8.5 years, I thought that, I was well prepared. I thought that, I was resilient as anything. But having been an MP and having grown adults just call you all names under the sun, has made my resilience probably even firmer. So I would like to think Grumpy Gullis, as I once coined it, which I know that gets used by the wokerati on Twitter to sort of moan about me. The Grumpy Gullis is coming back in full force, and he's not afraid to stand up for what he thinks is right. But then what else have I learned? I think if I get to learning about the process and actually understanding the textbook version of what politics is versus the reality of how actually Westminster works. If I do any A-level in that regard, it'd be fantastic to share that experience with those students. In terms of 11 to 16-year-olds, I think the one thing I most certainly learned from having been a member of Parliament is the fact that explain to kids how you can have difference of opinions and how to respect the other person's difference. And whilst the chamber, yes, I'm well versed in having a pop at the opposition in the chamber, but it's always a good nature. And the key thing is that the chamber is where it stays. I don't then take it out with me. I get on with members of the Labour Party and the SNP. I call some of them really good friends, David Linden, for example. Conor McGinn in St Helens. These are guys I really, really respect, really, really like. And I think that I can bring that to the idea that you can have a different view, you can vehemently disagree with it, you can passionately disagree with it, but it doesn't mean you don't have to respect the other person for having their difference of opinion.
Yeah. You mentioned LFTs earlier on. I heard some talk on the radio yesterday about whether or not we should prioritise LFTs for teachers and obviously still, and healthcare professionals. Do you think teachers, school education staff should now receive priority LFT test sets and PCR testing?
So look, you've got to remember the government has been giving out lateral flows hand over fist to schools to hand out. And I know in my own partner's school, right before they broke up, kids would be giving 2-3 boxes to take home, as well as teaching staff for the Christmas period. So the government has already been prioritising education, especially with the fact that we're having testing before kids come back, testing in the schools, obviously, when they first return, to make sure that we can find any positive cases and get those children isolated so it doesn't spread any further. I think schools have always been treated as a priority with the testing regime. Of course, there's lateral flows accessibility is not just a UK issue; it is a global issue in some regard, because there is such a high demand for it. And one of the things the UK has done much more successfully than nearly most European countries is to have a world-leading testing program where we're seeing millions of tests being undertaken. I took a PCR test 24 hours ago and it's already come back, with the results. So I've got an abundance of lateral flows available in my house. I know there's local pharmacies in Golden Hill today, for example, that have said that they've got them. So yeah, I get people's frustration at times. We are all competing to get these lateral flows in some ways, but there is the UK government is doing everything it can, and schools have always been treated as a priority in that regard.
And just looking a bit further forward, exams is the thing that certainly is going to be on the minds of students, of parents, and of school leaders. What do you think we should now do about the exams in 2022? Can they still conceivably go ahead as planned?
So I actually asked this question. I don't know if you saw, Dan, probably not, because you have more interesting things to do. But I asked this question to the minister the minister from the Department of Education. There was an urgent question brought forward by Robert Halfon, and I did ask, assurances need to be given over exams. I think that the Department of Education has to come out in the first 2 weeks of spring term and make it very clear, is there going to be a plan B, or are we sticking with plan A? I personally think exams should be sat. I think that there have, of course, been challenges for some students and for some teachers when it comes to teaching all the content. I think there's ways around that with the exam papers, how you do those exam papers. Do we do maybe some multiple choice basic knowledge questions, then one big significant essay question? Do we have, do markers have to take into consideration? For example, if a child was impacted by absence, can that somehow be shared with the exam boards if it's COVID related? I think that there's little things like that can be done. I think the challenge actually is on the exam boards to come up with very quickly announcing how they're going to make sure the exam papers are as fair as possible. But I think we've had enough of these predictions at the end of the day. It's not the best way to examine kids. It will not be, it does undermine children who have worked really hard, who maybe have not ended up with grades they would have got had they sat the exam, particularly kids from disadvantaged backgrounds who, these Fisher Family Trust target grades, which make me sick to my stomach because they were only ever advisory. They were only ever kids, performing in a perfect scenario, never took into account that 11 to 16, you go through a thing called puberty, as well as having other life challenges, maybe family breakdown, etc. So, I think that has to all be taken into account. And that's why I think exams are the best way forward. But I think the exam boards need to make sure those papers are as fair as possible, so students aren't instinctively unfairly treated just because of the fact that they may have missed some face-to-face teaching. It's a challenge. It's going to be difficult. We're going to have that discussion about grade boundaries, how we swallow up grade inflation over the last 2-3 years to make sure it doesn't directly impact. But we need clear answers, and we need them urgently.
I was reading some things today. Stephen Morgan, Labour Shadow Schools Minister, he basically called this current idea by the DfE to get retired teachers back into the profession as a sticking plaster. He said ministers have continued to fall short on delivering basic COVID protections in schools, Kevin Courtney of the NEU said the same thing. The disruption is likely to be made worse because of the government's failures to put in place mitigations and safety measures that we've been calling for. Do you think the DfE have done everything they possibly can at this point? If not, what would you like to see them do, as we return to school in a few days' time?
Well, Kevin Courtney, again, needs to resign with immediate effect, Dan, because he's an embarrassment to the profession. I think he's a con artist, in my opinion, in the way that he goes about. And whilst he's funneled over £500,000 to opposition political parties, or to every political party in England, except for, it feels like in some ways, well, definitely Labour, Lib Dems and others, except for the Conservative Party, shows you that these guys are interested in just playing party politics. That's why I'm not surprised Stephen Morgan is, trapped by the paymaster general, as it were. The Labour Party cannot divert from not education union messaging, otherwise they would face serious, retribution. The wrath of Courtney, the wrath of Bowstead. I mean, not that it would bother me in the slightest, but clearly they're worried about it. Because they've been busy paying adverts over the NEU, have been busy paying for targeted ads at Tory MPs over Christmas. It's good to know where all that hard-earned money that teachers pay into this trade union goes, not on actually teacher welfare, but just on petty party politics, which is why it's trying to sack these two jokers out of their jobs and spare us all the boredom that they tweet about and they go on TV and talk about. I have to switch off the TV, otherwise it sends me into a deep sleep because I'm so bored of their chat. But in terms of Labour, being the Labour Party must be great, because all you do is moan and groan if you're in the Labour Party. You never come up with an alternative solution. Opposition is not just about opposing, it's about offering an alternative viewpoint, winning it in the public court of opinion, and then guess what? The government's either going to adopt your policy, which therefore means you are technically a government in waiting, or you lose it in the court of public opinion, and then you go away and you look at where you went wrong. So Stephen to be moaning and groaning that this is just a sticking plaster, well, that's absurd, because what they should be doing is joining in with the call and calling on ex-teachers to come forward. They've got Emma Hardy, for example. She used to be a teacher. Let's get Emma back into the classroom and promote the fact. I don't care what political party you are. I think this transcends party politics. This should be about everyone coming together and everyone doing their bit. I think there are challenges when it comes, for example, we've seen it with tutors. But it's not because there is a issue with the fact there is a lack of tutors in some regards, and National Tutoring Programme's been working really hard to recruit people into tutoring. And just like teaching, we know that we know that for a long time, teaching profession has been talked down. That has put some people off coming into the profession. It also has meant some people have left earlier than we'd like them to have done. But, to moan and groan about things doesn't solve things. It just puts more people off. What we need to be doing is talking about the positives of teaching, and that's what Get Into Teaching has been doing with all those fantastic TV adverts about the profession. People like yourself, Dan, who are in the profession, who can celebrate it and talk about it in a positive light, and people like me who have been in the profession, who changed career not because they were escaping teaching, but because obviously another opportunity came along to bring a teacher's voice to the House of Commons, bring a different perspective into the Conservative Party, for example. That's what I'm trying to do. And I just think that Stephen, is just playing party politics. He's not getting behind this agenda. And like I say, I don't know what else they would suggest doing. If these volunteers don't come forward, we're talking about year groups, or we're talking about schools having to shut their gates for a day or two, or maybe even a week. So if people like me don't come forward, do we really, is the alternative any better? No, it's not. So I think that the Department of Education is doing all it can at the moment. Obviously, we are going through this Omicron variant. Let's hope that it follows what we've seen in South Africa. It's a very sharp upward rising cases, and then a very sharp downward fall in maybe end of January time, if sort of timelines follow like they did in South Africa. But we've been doing the right thing. We've been getting jabs into people's arms. We've got millions, over 30 million people now boosted, well over 50% of the adult population. This is really, really fantastic. And that's what teachers can be doing. And then obviously those 12-year-olds to 15-year-olds as well, getting more of those, at least their first dose before the start of term is exactly what needs to happen, because that will be our best defense, meaning that young people and teachers and teaching assistants and support staff and the fantastic dinner ladies and dinner men, I should probably say as well before I get told off, make sure that they're doing their bit as well, because ultimately that goes a long way to helping keep the school running and open.
And just on a wider look at the current situation across the United Kingdom. I've got to say about my dad, he lives in North Wales and he's currently under increasing levels of frustration, as I'm sure a lot of the Welsh population are, as Drakeford is now running his police state, with locking people down, fining people for leaving the house. Sturgeon is obviously doing what she can to cement her power. And of course, as we're going to see probably over the next couple of nights, the good people of Scotland are going to come to England to come and celebrate. What are your views on these national lockdowns in Wales and Scotland, and perhaps a bigger one across the UK as a whole?
Well, look, I can tell you one thing. Chloe Smith did a fantastic answer, which I know terribly upset the separatists in Scotland, because she said that, of course, people from Scotland can come to England because we're one united kingdom. It's our country, it's their country, it's all our country. And she's bang on the money. You know, this is not okay. I know Nicola Sturgeon's desperate to use this as an opportunity to pretend there's some sort of border. Hadrian's Wall has not been reconstructed. You know, people from Scotland can travel into England and vice versa. And so the idea that they're trying is just using this again for political gain, political advantage, to try and create a nationalistic tone, to try and somehow separate themselves from the UK government in order to make out as if, you know, that they are you know, somehow the pariahs of, or they're better than, you know, anyone else. And, you know, as for Drakeford, I mean, blimey, yes, fining you £60 if you go into the office, but you're allowed to go to the pub, is, you know, and then what is it? Earlier, I remember he reopened pubs, didn't he? But you couldn't have an alcoholic drink. I mean, the constant, you know, and then locked off being able to buy, you know, pants in Tesco's, but I could go and obviously buy crates of beer. You know, it was just utterly bizarre. And it just, to me, it's just people trying to play politics. They've got themselves, obviously, Mark Drakeford and Nicola Sturgeon have had a lot of national publicity because obviously they are the democratic elected leaders in their assemblies or in their parliaments. They are therefore using this as an opportunity to try and diverge away from Westminster if they can, or try and force Westminster to follow their lead. I think that the Prime Minister's hit the nail on the head in following the data, following the science. Yes, this is very transmissible. Yes, we are seeing an increase in hospitalisation, but nowhere near the numbers where Delta was prevalent at this moment in time. We know the scientists have come back and said the booster jab has a massive impact, and that's why we've seen such a huge increase in people coming forward and getting their booster jab. You know, we've overtaken Israel now, you know, for example, with boosters. We're leading the way in Europe. Then you've also got the fact that we're asking people to use their common sense, you know, and which is what we should be doing. People, I know, like you would have done before Christmas Day, everyone did lateral flows. You know, in the build up to Christmas Day, we've been doing lateral flows since, every time we've been around people. You know, I'm literally about to do mine after this call this morning. I did a PCR yesterday because I just wanted to be double check, be doubly safe, that we're doing all the right things, especially having obviously seen more elderly relatives like my mum and dad. And, you know, thank God, negative all round for everyone involved. So this is really, really positive. And I just think that it's, I just think lockdowns in general, I think that we are slowly moving, pardon me, to a time where they shouldn't even be on the table as a discussion. And the one thing absolutely that is a red line for me is the idea of ever having to send kids away from the school gates again, or closing the school gates off to a certain amount of students. I would never, ever support that. That is an absolute no-no for me. Yes, I think it was right last year when we didn't know anything about we didn't have the vaccines in place. Now we have vaccination, and now we need to focus on making sure that kids get the very best education they can.
Well, Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for giving us your time in the Christmas holidays. And hopefully we'll see you back in the classroom very, very soon. I'm sure you'll update us when you are recruited. I'm sure there'll be a fight and a scrabble between the various schools and trusts to get your services. And it will be a pleasure to see you back at the chalk face with many, many of us. You know, you're a man who's constantly.
And I can tell you.
Come on.
I can tell you one thing, Dan. There's probably plenty of heads who I've been in the room with talking about education who are desperate to get me, and then hopefully even like lesson observe me to find out if, you know, if I'm all chat or all trouser. You know, this is what we're gonna find out. But yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. You know, like I say, I'm offering my Fridays. If I can play a small part, I will do. But there's many people who are coming forward offering 5 days a week. Those are the real heroes. And the teaching profession, you know, I want to say a big thank you to everyone involved, not just the teachers, but support staff, the caretakers, the dinner men and ladies, whoever it may be, because I've seen with my own partner how difficult this has been. As I say, she's a head of RE, she runs a department. You know, I've seen the challenges that she's undergone. You know, I've spoken to kids and teachers in my schools in my local area, across Stoke-on-Trent North, Kids Grove and Talk. This has been one of the most trying time in the teaching profession in, you know, probably since World War II, to be quite frank. And I think the teaching profession has stood up and been counted. And I just think that they haven't had the praise nor love that they rightfully deserve. And so therefore, I want to make a big, big shout and big thank you to everyone for doing their bit.
Jonathan Gullis, MP for Stoke-on-Trent North, Kids Grove and Talk, member of the Commons Education Select Committee. Thank you very much, sir.
Cheers, Doc.